Hi everyone. I thought I'd start off by just giving a brief introduction to the department. So the Department of Education and Training is a huge organisation. We have about 70,000 employees across the state, including our government school teachers. However, the main focus of this programme of work was our corporate staff, who are located in our central precinct in the CBD and in our 4 regional offices and 17 education areas. Back in 2013, when we started off this work, we inherited a situation where we had an electronic document and records management system that was about 5 years old at the time, and we had quite a lot of issues in terms of the implementation of that previous system. And we had an intranet site which was completely unmanaged, so there was no governance, no real ownership of content, a lot of legacy content that wasn't being looked at or reviewed on a regular basis. We didn't really have great facilities for mobile workers, so we did have people who were moving between regional locations, whose jobs were quite mobile and who weren't well supported from an information and technology perspective. And we didn't really have any platform for good collaboration in the department. So we had a lot of disparate practice where people were out doing their own thing and using cloud facilities, and again, in a completely ungoverned way. We looked at initial analysis for the redesign and re-implementation of an EDRMS, and just thought a bit creatively about what we could do to bring all those disparate problems together and come up with a single solution. And that project was called the EduGate Extension Project, but it formed part of a wider information strategy, and the stream of the information strategy that it fell under was enabling collaboration and compliance. So our original intranet was called EduGate, hence the name of the project. And so that wheel there is they're the different kind of components of the project. And one of the things that we really tried to learn from the experience of the previous EDRMS implementation was to place a really strong emphasis on change management and engaging our user base. And even having taken on board that lesson, I still think we didn't do enough. And we'll come to that later in the presentation when I talk about the lessons we learnt from this implementation. So in terms of what we were trying to achieve here, we wanted to place a really big emphasis on transparency across the department. We came from a situation where people were hoarding information and using it to inform their own decisions, but not necessarily thinking about the broader department objectives. So in terms of what we tried to achieve through the strategy and through this programme of work, which was our flagship project, we wanted people to be able to collaborate easily. We wanted to change the paradigm around compliance. So we wanted people to be compliant without necessarily having to think about it. And I think that's actually harder to achieve than it sounds, because we're still finding that there is a balancing act between the extent to which people need to know about their records obligations and the extent to which we just want them to be encouraged to save documents, and we will take care of the rest of it for them. So we're still figuring that out. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to support mobile workers in a better way and connect our information across disparate systems. So in terms of the way we went about that, we did some initial analysis of the EDRMS products in the market. So we looked at TRIM, we looked at eDocs, which was the previous system that we had used, but we looked at the new version of it. We looked at the IBM product, and we looked at SharePoint with RecordPoint. So our old intranet site was in SharePoint, and we already had licensing for our staff. And so our business case was created on the basis of the fact that it was the most cost-effective way of delivering a solution for the department. And it was significantly cheaper than any of the competitor products. So we weren't really looking at whether what we had opted for was best of breed in terms of an EDRMS product. We were more thinking about how can we leverage what we've already got. And we also wanted to place a really strong emphasis on the user. And so we felt that it was easier for users to only have to use one interface. And what we have now is SharePoint in the front end, and then we have RecordPoint wrapped around it for VERS compliance. So the key streams of our program, we had the need to implement the new EDRMS. We initially started off with a very socially focused design for our intranet site, and along the way we backtracked a bit on that due to implementation issues. And what we've ended up with is a single platform. So users have a very attractive looking intranet site which contains formal content, all of which is governed through our communications division. So there's a central point for registering new content or making updates, and that's handled by our internal communications team. And then we also have what I think of as the less formal content, but it's on the same platform. So users can create collaboration sites, project sites for project documentation, and team sites. And they are also housed on SharePoint. And they don't look quite as fancy as the intranet site, but they're great spaces for people to collaborate, to share documents, and to make use of their own information and also make it available to others. So some business areas will have formal intranet content supported by more detailed information in a collaboration space, and some areas will actually point people in the first instance to a collaboration space where, for example, they've got a working group and they want all of the members of the working group to have access to those documents. So alongside that, another section of our information strategy was focused on improving information governance and enhancing our business processes. So we had come from a history of not really having any senior executive oversight of information as a discipline. We now have an Information Management and Technology Committee, which is the decision-making body for all things information and technology, including records. And they have a published terms of reference. They meet monthly, and they arose in terms of those terms of reference out of the programme steering committee that oversaw this project. So they actually have a really strong and active engagement in the information part of information and technology, which is great from our point of view because they're our sponsors for future work as well. So we did some business analysis about what our key business processes were and which ones might be most in need of remediation. And our briefings and correspondence process emerged top of the list of things that needed to be addressed. So previously that was an entirely paper-based occurrence. Nobody knew where briefings were. So somebody would author a briefing and send it up the chain, and then nobody knew where it had got to, whether it had been sent back. There was a previous tracking system for tracking paper documents, but it wasn't universally used, and it wasn't, people didn't necessarily have access to it at the authoring of a document level. So we decided that that process fit really well with the other objectives of this program of work. And what we've ended up with is a briefings and correspondence system, which is also hosted in SharePoint. It addresses the issue of the fact that those documents are probably our highest risk documents in terms of our previous lack of compliance. So we know now that you can't send a briefing to a deputy secretary or a minister's office without logging it through that system. And logging it in that system means it's records managed. And the system has the capacity to enable electronic signatures, but we haven't gone all the way down that route yet, because in terms of our change management program, we felt that it was useful to focus on what was really achievable. And during the time frame of this program, we've had an entire change of our senior leadership team. And with that, the change in emphasis on what's most important. And I think it would be fair to say that our current senior execs are extremely interested in mitigating risk, and are not so bothered about whether that risk mitigation occurs in a partly paper form or an entirely digital form. So that's something that we're holding in reserve for future work. So in terms of how we knitted those disparate issues and bits of the program together, we set up a program team. We upgraded our SharePoint instance to SharePoint 2013. So that was the sort of technical pre-part of the project. And that was a bit issue-rich in itself, because it caused delays to the rest of the project. But it was a necessary precursor in terms of establishing a really strong platform that could meet all of the non-functional requirements for the rest of the work. I don't think I'm going to spend any more time on that slide. So in terms of what we think we've achieved, we know now that we should have devoted more attention to the change part of the work. And I think instead of being at a point that we envisaged in 2013, where now we would have a complete all singing, all dancing system that all our users were engaged with, we've come to appreciate that it's a longer term journey than that. And that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of the compliance side of things. And also that we need to do frequent check-ins in terms of the collaboration aspects of it. So earlier this year, our executive board, which is our most senior decision-making committee, discussed at 2 separate meetings the principle of open by default, which this new platform enables for the department. And there are varying levels of comfort across the organisation with that completely transparent approach to managing our information and records. And in terms of our audiences, our schools are still not active users of the system. So when it comes to other future work, we know that we still have a lot of change work to do with schools. So we're launching an intranet, a version of the intranet that is more schools focused for the beginning of 2017. And we are in the process of doing more analysis around the records needs of schools. So record keeping in schools is still primarily paper-based, and we're looking at what some of the electronic options might be. And we're completely open-minded at this stage about what that looks like. So it might be that we roll them onto the SharePoint offering, or it might be that we look at different solutions for them, given that their needs are so different. So in terms of our business case, these are our benefits at a fairly high level. So we now have a single platform for our information and records. We don't yet have absolutely all of our staff using it. So we know that we still have staff who are using shared drives, for example. And part of our future work will be about moving to a read-only model in the shared drive storage space. We implemented some business engagement, business solution manager resources as part of the project. And if I went back and did the business case again, I would make the case for those people to be ongoing, because when the project closed, those people rolled off, and what it's left is a real gap between the business capability to set up and maintain their libraries and sites and what we are able to offer them with our current resource level. And I might add that our current resource level is really low for an organisation our size. I suppose the thing that we're probably most proud of is what we've managed to achieve given that. So we currently have 3 specialist records staff for an organisation of 70,000 people. And then we have a broader team of other information specialists sat around that. So all our information functions are in the same place in the organisation at least. But in terms of then having that reach and impact across our audience, it's extremely challenging. So our system is a compliance system, but in terms of our compliant behaviours, we're still working on that actively. We have a few current projects that are following up on this programme of work, and one of those is specifically about trying to raise capability levels across the department. So from the experience of training staff, we trained 2,500 departmental staff in how to use SharePoint, save documents, reuse documents, and manage their information. And it wasn't enough. So people left training and forgot what they'd learnt. They went back to their business areas and found that they didn't have the infrastructure in terms of sites and libraries to support what they'd just learnt. And also we've had huge changes in the department in terms of new staff onboarding, probably more so than at any other point in the history of the department because of education state and having a new secretary and recovering from the wake of the IBAC investigations. So the new information capability project is looking at a revised approach to how we train and engage people, with more of an emphasis on embedding how people manage their information in their everyday work. So it won't just be about classroom training to use the system, it will also be about raising awareness about the policy imperatives, getting people to describe how their day goes in terms of how they interact with information and how it's most useful to them to pop the system into their worldview. So we're thinking about things like people, like one-on-one coaching, more of a mentoring approach to managing information rather than just straightforward training. What else have we done? We currently have about 200 sites, and the way we've set our libraries up is that they link to our business classification scheme. So we have specialist users who can create libraries, and their training involves understanding the relationship between the library and the classification scheme. And that's something else that we're still working on refining that approach, because we found that in spite of the training, we have users, and those more experienced users even, who aren't quite getting that right. So we know that we need to do more work to monitor that in order to ensure good compliance. There's some other stats on there, but I'm not going to read them. I'm happy for the slides to be available afterwards for that, from that point of view. We found with mobile working that because SharePoint's entirely web-based, that has really improved the quality of people's working days. So our executives can access records at home in the evening if they're doing work then. Our mobile workers can move between sites and still have access to the same information. And in terms of the collaboration side of that, we have sites that are based around specific workforces. So, for example, our psychologists and allied health workers will now collaborate across regional boundaries, because all of their information is saved in a single site, and they might have collections within that overarching site that are specific to their particular cases, but they also have access to each other's knowledge and understanding. So our lessons learned. So I've talked quite a bit about change and training and the people engagement in terms of our user base. But we also learnt some really valuable lessons about governing a program of this scope. So we ran the project as one overarching program with 3 component projects, one for intranet, one for EDRMS, and one for briefings and correspondence. And I think that was the right approach, because there were different key stakeholders in each of those spaces. So, for example, our regional services group were really key stakeholders in the EDRMS space. Our intranet space, our colleagues in communications and our SharePoint developers in IT were and continue to be key stakeholders. And in the briefing space, obviously, our senior execs' offices and our ministerial offices needed to be consulted and kept engaged as the workflow process was determined and the project unfolded. So we had issues with governance. I don't think that we did enough work very early on in the project to ensure that all the different intentions that people had poured into this program of work were well aligned. So we had disparate visions, particularly for the intranet. So our comms team were very focused on delivering news, whereas our focus was much more on sharing knowledge and enabling people to collaborate and work together. And the impact that had on the project, I referred to earlier when I said that we rolled back some of our more ambitious intentions for providing a really social interactive platform. So we, yes, you can share documents, but we don't have currently the ratings systems and the comment fields that we'd originally planned to have. And a lot of that, I think, was just about trying to be more realistic as the project progressed about the current maturity of the organisation and what the users were willing to embrace and what will obviously be a much longer term programme of work. What else do I need to talk about here? I also referred a bit to the staffing for the transition between the project phase and business as usual. So the original business case, and I don't think this is uncommon in a government environment, underscoped the need for ongoing support. And so that's caused us issues that we're now really actively trying to address in terms of marrying up how our training offering works with the service that we provide to the organisation to help them configure good sites, and our support service to provide that aftercare for both the capability side of it and the need for people to have support in terms of enhancing existing sites or creating new ones. So that's all work that was originally envisaged as being in scope for the project and has just naturally bled out into the business as usual phase. So we're almost in sort of phase 2 of a project, but without the advantage of having project funding now. Does anyone have any questions?
Not so much a question, but just where you just touched on the disparate ideas of what your end product was going to be. I guess I'm just wondering whether there's the advantage of having that sort of system that's catering to all these people, or whether there's some key disadvantages because everyone wants it to look or do something quite differently. Do you think there's a balance of one to the other that's, you know, still more important to have it together despite the potential roadblocks?
I think it is, definitely. So in terms of discoverability, there are huge advantages because you don't really have to think anymore from a user perspective about where information resides. And there's a search engine that sits across the different degrees of formality of what is in place. So you can find information even if you don't know whether it's in a collaboration site or it's a formal intranet page or it's a document in a library. And I think that will always outweigh those disadvantages that come when people have different ambitions for a system. And I would say that we're currently in a really good place in terms of those disagreements that surfaced along the way of the project. So as the project progressed, we implemented stronger governance. We have a weekly meeting that's focused on the intranet. We have less issues in the EDRMS space because as the information and knowledge area, we're very much in control of that part of the system, and we're responsible for the policy in that area. Whereas for the intranet, we share that responsibility with communications, and that always makes it more complicated, I think. And I think, for us, winning the Hamer Award has been hugely valuable for the reasons that the other winners mentioned, because it does increase the profile of the work that you're doing within your own agency, but also because I think it made the approach feel more justified. Education is used in Victorian government to feeling like the maverick department who's kind of out there on their own doing something strange that no one else would touch. And we've had quite a lot of interest from other agencies about the paradigm that's more focused on the user.
Is there executive support or appetite to cease the paper at the school level?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that we know the answer to it yet. So I could simplistically say yes, in view of the fact that particularly the public hearings for IBAC, I think, created quite a lot of noise around really poor management of paper records. So obviously that's something that needs to be addressed and that everybody is committed to addressing. But I think when it comes to a more wholesale digitisation approach, we're not quite sure yet. And we're still in the early stages of that particular part of this work. So we're doing some analysis at the moment with a view to building a business case.
Have you been able to measure some of those benefits that you mentioned earlier?
We do have some measures, and I think, again, like in terms of maturity, like in 2013, the department generally was quite poor when it came to building business cases. So the measures weren't necessarily built into that business case. And it was considered to be quite a good business case at the time. But I think our maturity has increased since then. So some of our measures I don't think are quite measuring the right thing. So for example, I don't think there's any point measuring how many people you've trained, because what you're really interested in is what was the traction and how many people are actively using the system, and how many shared drives have closed down. And we have measured some of that. And we have distinct areas of the department that are real champions for like this way of working and this approach. One of our big success stories is the Victorian Registration and Qualifications Authority. So they previously had shared drives for electronic documents, and they managed all their records on paper. And they were really early adopters of the new system, and they volunteered to close their shared drives because they took the sort of high-level objectives of the department-wide strategy and said, right, this is what this means for our business area, and this is how we're going to work. And a lot of that was driven by senior executive sponsorship and support. No worries.
Okay, our final and very short presentation today will be a demonstration